Hello, in the last video we did the head rig for the IK and FK and I got distracted and left it in kind of a mess. So this video will be about the final cleanup of the entire rig, just before we go into adding the armor parts. So what we're going to do today is clean up all the stuff that we did with the head. We're going to add some extra roll bones into the arm and into the leg so that the deformation is better when you rotate the arms. As you can see here, when I rotate this up, the entire deltoid rotates with it. Same with the hand. There's a lot going on in the wrist that we want to remove. And then we're going to create a slave rig. In this case, as you can see here, the skeleton is quite clean. It only has constraints, and here and there it has like a locator. But this one also has like the IK and FK parts in there. And the slave rig is a rig that is entirely driven by the skeleton that you have here, but then a clean version. So it doesn't have all the extra joints in there like the IK and FK. It doesn't have any K handles in there, and it should remove all the stuff like the end joints we have here that make the rig a little bit cleaner for export for a game rig. So for this one I'm going to create a slave rig, which we are going to skin the final version of this mesh to. So first off, let's clean up the controls that we created last time. So the head group can be parented to the master control. The neck group needs to be part of the last piece of the spine, so I'm going to create a locator. This is going to be a neck locator. And I'm going to select the last piece of the spine, select neck locator, constraint, parent constraint without offset, and I'll just parent the neck group into this neck locator. So now when I move, the entire neck moves with it. Switch over to the IK version, and let's see what this one does. So the neck, or the IK control for the head, stays in the exact same position. So if I overshoot the rotations, it will break the neck. So we need to figure out a way to deal with that as well. So I'll probably parent this one to the neck locator. So now when I rotate this forward, it seems okay. And then we also need to have the rotation like we did with the FK head. Then we can switch the local to world. We can also add that to the IK head control. So yet again, I'll go and check if I can find the locators that I created for that. So let's see if I can go through the connections here. Go into Window, Node Editor, and open only the inputs. Let's see. For the orient constraint, close the tab to clean the scene. So we have head local and head world. Select them both. Select the IK head control group, constraint, orient. Let's see if that flips the head. It seems to be okay. Let's do, instead of the head local that we have here, because the one is connected to the neck controls of the FK, I'll just do the neck locator itself. And then do a constraint orient. It's already connected. Let's clean this one first. So world, neck locator, and the IK head control group, constraint orient. So it flips. Let's remove that flip. Let's see. So I duplicate head world, IK head local. Just parent that to the neck locator. Select them both. Select the IK control group. And now do the orient constraint. So now it doesn't change if I flip between these. And then I add the attributes. Local to world from 0 to 1. Set driven key. Load it as a driver. Load the orientation constraint as driven. Local to world. Let's select the last two attributes in here. First is going to be local key. Then I'm going to switch to world. Switch these values and key it again. So now when I rotate this, it's attached to world. And if I switch back to this, it's attached locally. Back again here, so the neck locator that we created and attached here can be parented to the master control. The head IK and the head IK curve, which are driven by the head control, can go into the don't touch group. So let's see where that is. Let's rename this to don't touch. And we still need to attach the head blender box. So we create a locator, select head blender box, do a parent constraint, or let's do a point constraint. Duplicate it and select the last joint for the, let's make sure that it is the correct one. So the head to this locator, do a point constraint, delete the first one because that's the exact same one as the other one, and since we duplicated it, it doesn't have any connections anymore. So we can delete this one, also delete the previous one, parent the locator into the other one, and then select the locator 5, the head blender box, and do a point constraint as well. So now we can say this is the head blender box position, and this is the locator. And both can be parented to the master control. So now when we move the head, this moves correctly with it. And select both locators. Go into the shapes. Set the local scale to 0. Press down once. Display. Transform display. Object display. Template. And I'll add the keyboard UI. So now this is pretty clean. Let's see if I remove the NURBS curves, remove polygons, and remove joints. We still have some stuff left in the scene. So I'm going to select the don't touch group and select the one in here in the layer, which already adds all selected to the layer. Give it a nice name. I always give the don't touch layer a red color, and I set it to reference. And you can hide this as well. So select everything that's visible here and add it to that layer. See, so stuff got removed with the last selection. So normally for the locators, remove joints, I just select the locators, I change the shape to 0, and then I set the display of the shape to template. So everything that's parented in there is still visible, while you can't select the locator itself. Now let's add the roll bones to the arms. So I'm going to also go in here, make sure I can select the arms. First off, I want to clean up the FK and IK joints so I can't select them. So let's go into the script editor, add a new tab, and then from Maya we import CMDS. For the selection, I'm going to make sure that I have selected as an input LS. So I want to have the selection, but I also want to make sure that I only have a type selected, which is the joint. So if I print it now and I select a joint and a constraint, it will only print out the joint. So for each joint I want to cast the name joint to I, and I want to set the attribute. If you select the wrist, let's make it visible here. Let's change the radius so you can actually see it. If I go into the attribute editor, you have a draw style. You can set it to multi-child as box. So if you have a lot of lines like this, and set it to multi-child, it removes most of the lines and just generate a box. But for this one we want to set it as none. So we can't see it and we can't select it. So we know that the attribute here is draw style. So I want to have the joint plus the attribute draw style and set it to 2. So now I can select all the joints that I want here, press this, let's see, wrong quotes, and now all the IK and FK joints in the shoulder are invisible, so we can't select them. Let's get back to the original. And I'll only do this for the upper and lower arm on the left arm, so you guys can do that later on the other side. And the upper leg is the exact same as the upper arm. So let's create a joint. Select the upper arm, select the joint, and do a parent constraint. And let's call this left shoulder roll. And change the size to something bigger. And let's freeze its transformations. Let's hide the polygons from here. And duplicate this. 1, 2, 3. Let's create a curve. So curve tool, CV curve tool, options, make sure that's linear. Snap one to the top, snap one to the bottom. Let's also generate this one for the lower arm. So we can use that later on as well. And for both I want to display the CVs. and for both I want to rebuild the curve. So it's uniform from 0 to 1, keep the ends, and I want to just make it cubic. And as you can see, it now generated points on 1/3 and 2/3 of the curve. So we can snap these bones on there. The last one can be parented to the first one. Let's call this shoulder roll end. And these we can just give roll 1 and 2. So now I want to create an IK handle with a single chain solver. So select first one, select that one. So now this IK handle should make sure that the joint always follows. And what I want to do is I want to parent the shoulder roll and the IK handle. Let's give this a nice name. Something like this. I want to parent them both to the clavicle. And then from the elbow, I want to select the IK handle and do a point constraint. So now, if I make both joints visible with the local rotation axis, you will see that when I rotate this, one of them stays behind and the original shoulder will rotate, while the newly created shoulder roll stays exactly still, no matter where that I rotate the entire arm to. So this is like counter rotation for the X rotation that we generate on the arm. And the only thing that we have to do now is to make sure that this rotation is nicely blended over the entire arm. So that's where these come in. So I select, or I'll just parent them first to the original shoulder roll arm, or the original shoulder. And these should have 0 rotations because they have the same orientation as the shoulder itself. Then I select the left shoulder and the left shoulder roll. Select the first joint, do an orient constraint, make sure it's without offset. And do the same for the second one. So these two joints, let's make sure that the local rotation axis is in there. And let's make sure that it's rotated a bit. So these will blend between the two shoulders that we have. So if I select the first joint and go in here, I want to make sure that this one rotates on, the rotation is more in line with the shoulder roll than the shoulder itself. So I just double the influence it has. So now it's more rotated towards the shoulder roll. For this one, I want to have more of the shoulder. Set this one to 2. You can see that it nicely blends over until the shoulder. So this is the setup for a shoulder roll. And you can do the exact same on the other shoulder and on the leg. The lower arm is a little bit different because all the rotations will come from the hand, but it will be similar in how we set it up. So generate new bone and select the elbow, select the bone, do a parent constraint. delete the parent constraint and make it a little bit bigger. And freeze its transforms. And let's duplicate and place them over the curve we made. So in this case, we don't want to have the joint aiming towards the wrist, but from the wrist back to the elbow. So I'm going to select joint 1 and parent it to joint 4. And let's give them nice names. Left wrist roll. Let's go in reverse. Like that. So now we have the elbow in reverse. And we can parent this one to the elbow to make sure that whatever we do, it will always follow the rotations of the elbow and not what the wrist does. And again, we go to skeleton, create IK handle, and we select the part that's on the wrist. Then we select the part that's in the elbow, and we parent this IK handle to the wrist joint. So now whatever you do with the wrist, the IK handle will follow. Let's hide the previously created IK handle, and we select the elbow again, the IK handle, and now we do a point constraint again. So if we rotate the wrist, the IK handle will stay in the position of the elbow. And if I show what that does with the local rotation axis, is I can rotate the wrist forward, but the joint that's on top of the wrist is not allowed to rotate forward. But it does do all the rotations in the other directions. So this will make up for a nice wrist rotation. And again, we can select the newly created joint. Now we also select the elbow, and then select one of the roll bones, do an orient constraint. For the second one, the same. And for this one, I want to rotate it more with the wrist than with the elbow. So we set this one to 2. And for this one, I want to have the elbow more influence. So set that one to 2. And if I show the local rotation axis and rotate the wrist, you can see it nicely blends from the elbow onto the wrist. While the wrist, even though if you rotate it forward, it doesn't flip it. So this is something you can do for the other side and the top parts of the legs as well. So I'm going to pause the video and do that for the rest, and then we can continue with the slave rig. Well, before I do this, I'll just parent these 2 bones also to the elbow. And then we can delete these curves as we don't need them anymore. So small break, and then I will have generated the other roll bones, and then we can start with the slave rig. So now I've created the roll bones for the left arm and the hips. As you can see, when I rotate the leg outward, it nicely blends over the rotation. I added 3 roll bones in the middle because the leg is somewhat long, to minimize the chance that there's a ribbon effect going on, as you could see with the wrist in the beginning. And for this one, as you can see as well, the X is pointing in the reverse direction, as is with everything that's on the right side. So now we can continue with the creation of the slave rig. Let me remove the local rotation axis So we clean the rig again. Same here. And now we want to create for all the clean joints that we have a new joint, which is going to be the slave rig. And then we want to point and orient constrain those joints on those positions. So let's go into the script editor so we don't have to do all of it by hand. So I want to import my commands again. Do it based on selection. And we want to make sure that the type we have is joint again. Make sure we do the for loop. So we want to make sure that we clean the selection first, because we're going to create clean joints on the position of the previous joint. And if the joint is still in the selection, it will be parented automatically to the previous one. And we don't want to mess up the hierarchy when we start. So we want to clean it out first. And then we can create a slave joint. And we are going to add the name slave underscore before the original name that we have. Let's do a parent constraint from the original joint to the slave joint without offset, and delete the parent constraint. And then we're going to do a point and orient constraints. But first, let's make sure we freeze the transformations. So we make it identity. And just select the slave joint and apply it. Now we can do a point constraint from the original to the slave joint without offset. And let's do the same but with an orient constraint. So let's see. And expand everything. We want to have the root, we want to have the spines, we want to have the clavicle, the shoulders, everything except the last part of the thumb. Or of the fingers, for that matter. We want to have the roll joints in there as well. Not the end roll joint, but just the start and the two we have in the middle. Let's see. So we have the wrist roll, shoulder, shoulder. And then we also have the shoulder roll. So go in for this one as well. I just keep holding Ctrl so I can do single selections. Shoulder roll. I want to have the neck and the head. I want to have all the stuff in the tail, except for the last one. I don't want to have the IK parts. Don't need the stilts. I want to have the right hip. With the rolls. Did I forget some rolls in here? Still. As you can see, there's a lot that I'm not selecting. So that means that we're trying to make it as clean as possible. Just remove the toe here as well. Hip roll, hip roll. It looks about right. So let's generate the joints that we have. So we have the root. Let's already parent everything that we know that needs to be parented together. So just middle mouse drag them all in. If you want, you can also expand on the tool, so it doesn't only create the joints for you, but also keeps in mind the parents that it originally had, and then parent it all together. So let's see what we have here. If we hide the root here, let's also hide the master control, so we only have the skeleton to work with. So it seems that we miss a joint here, but we can parent the rest already. Let's see what I have selected. So I have the wrist here, but I also have a wrist roll, which is this one. And this one we actually want to parent. Let's see. Oh, this is okay. So we want to have the wrist parented to the wrist roll. Let's keep it consistent. So now we can parent all the fingers onto the wrist. The wrist roll goes to the previous one. As for the shoulder that we have here, we're going to break the point constraint on it, and we're going to unhide the skeleton that we had. I'm going to select the elbow and generate a new point constraint for it. So it rotates the exact same way as the shoulder does, but is in the position of the elbow, so we can nicely blend in between. So the elbow is going to be the part of the shoulder, shoulder is going to be part of the... Let's hide the skeleton again. this one can be part of the last piece of the spine. Same with the neck. Like that. Let's see if we can find the shoulder here as well. To break its point constraint. Go back to the root. And select the elbow. Select the shoulder and do a point constraint. Hide the skeleton again. Check out what's going on here. So we have the wrist roll. As you can see, there was a problem previously with the naming of the rolls, as these are all now called left instead of right. So let's correct that. Let's go back to the skeleton. Do the same here. So we can hide the skeleton again. These four can be parented to the wrist. Wrist is going to be part of the wrist roll. And this can be part of the elbow. And the elbow is going to be part of the shoulder. Yeah. Tail is part of the pelvis. Let's unparent the one here. And again here with the slave hip. Point constraint can be removed. And we're going to unhide the skeleton we had previously. Select the knee, select the hip. Point constraint. Same on the other side. Select the knee, select the hip. Point constraint. Hide the original skeleton. So the knee can be parented to the hip. The hip can be parented to the one above. So we have a nice chain again. So this is the clean version of the skeleton. And for the root, we can now select the root. We can go into the master control and parent the root to the master control. So when we scale, it scales correctly. If we want to add this feature to the slave rig, we also need to add the scale constraints to these joints. So in this case, if I go to the node editor, let's close this tab again and add the node. When we scale, we want to make sure that it always scales in all directions, so we can connect scale X to scale Y and Z. And we can lock and hide these. So when you scale, you always scale globally. And then the only thing you have to do is, I believe it's called alias utter. And then you give it the name of the original one, which is master control dot scale X, and I'm going to give it the name global scale. For this one, it doesn't work in this way. We need to swap them around. So now it's called global scale, and then every time you select it, you can just globally scale the entire character. Then we still have some nodes in here, like the animation curves, and we don't want the animator. If you go to animation editors, graph editor, there's a lot of curves in here that change the visibility of the controls or do something special. We don't want an animator to accidentally tweak them. So also for this case, we're going to add a script that can lock these down. So from Maya import CMDS. So we are going to create a lock list of all the attributes for anim curves we want to lock. And I'm just going to type them down. So this is all attributes that have to do with the graph editor. So you can select the curves, you can select the points of the curve, you can select the tangents, all that stuff. KTL, KOT, pre-tangent and the post-tangent. So that should be all the attributes that can be touched. So for each in our selection, which can be done in this way as well, we want to go through the lock list. For the lock in lock list, I'm going to set the attribute of that object and in this way with the %s I can insert a string on both sides of the point, and then with percentage and then the two variables I want to have in there, so I and lock. So I'm going to put the object in front. I have the object here, dot and the attribute, and I'm going to say that I want to lock it. And because I have everything selected, I can run this, and it didn't give me an error. So now if I go into the graph editor, you can see that everything is grayed out. I can't move anything, so this is locked properly. So now we can go on with the rest. So we have a control layer, which is always going to be visible and can be touched. And we have a skeleton layer. Which we can template later on so the animator can select it and we can hide the visibility, but because we're still working with it, it's nice to have it open. So that was it for cleaning the rig. In the next video tutorial I'm going to talk about how to skin this mesh onto the slave rig and how to copy that skin information over to the latest created model that the modeler has delivered.